Now that we've wrapped up the draft and free agency, it's time to look at the Panthers offseason as a whole. Can we consider it a success? I'll answer that question right here on this weekly Friday mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free right here on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council. Why? Because on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me. But of course, follow me on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for next week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. We are back once again for another edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. NFL draft wrapped up last weekend. Free agency, we're done with it. So now we're looking at the offseason as a whole. There's still going to be OTAs that go on later on this month in May. Then there'll be mandatory minicamp in June. There's going to be like a 6-week hiatus after that. So all the things that we're super concerned about when it comes to the offseason have already happened. They've already brought in players via free agency and the draft. They've hired a new head coach, Dave Canales, a new general manager in Dan Morgan, even brought over Brant Tillis from Kansas City to be the EVP of football operations, handling the salary cap and contracts. There's been a lot of things going on here in Carolina this offseason, which is nice. If there's going to be a bunch of bad in the fall, not winning games, at least let the offseason be interesting and provide hope for your boy and, of course, you, the Panther fan, and me too, the Panther fan. So let's get into the questions that y'all have for me this week, and it kind of ties to the offseason. Nathan's first question: have the Panthers done enough to consider this offseason a success, even if we don't make any more moves? It depends on how you defined what the Panthers needed to do this offseason. For me, the most important thing for this team was taking the pressure off of Bryce Young and setting him up for success next season. They did not do that last year. We felt like with the coaching staff, Frank Reich, his experience, bringing over Thomas Brown, marrying those two schemes, all of the other experienced men that they brought in offensively last year, that Bryce would be coached the right way. But then we read a report later on that season about how they were more focused on getting Bryce up to speed as far as the playbook and not working on things like fundamentals, not doing things that he was comfortable with at Alabama until the team was already in an 0-6 hole, things that just did not make any sense at all. Now, when you listen to Dave Canales, he is all about getting the football right. That he's talking about Bryce Young just being 1/11th of the offense, not having to be the offense, just playing his role. That has been the main objective for the Carolina Panthers, is taking the pressure off Bryce, helping put a team around him that he can succeed with, and that he'll be able to also help them succeed with his own talent. So in free agency, going out there on that first Monday, and whether you believe they overpaid or not, I don't think it really matters. What they needed to do was to find better offensive linemen to come in here. And they did that with Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt, spending $89 million guaranteed on those two players for the next couple of seasons. You fix that spot. You also add depth to your offensive line. Austin Corbett moves over to center. You have Brady Christensen, who can be the backup at center, the backup at guard, also could play tackle. They brought in Josh Nyman as their swing tackle. Chandler Zavala, he's played a lot of snaps already. Nash Jensen's played snaps in the league. Cade Mays has played snaps in the league. The Panthers have quality in their first five, but also depth when it comes to their offensive line. That is successful. You look at them needing to add playmakers, trading for Deontay Johnson, basically giving up Dante Jackson and trading a 6th for a 7th just to get a former Pro Bowl wide receiver, someone who's been an all-pro as a returner, and I don't expect him to return, but that's something that's now important again in the NFL with the recent rule changes as far as kickoff returns go. That's successful in itself. Then you get to the draft, and you spend 3 of your first 4 picks on more playmakers. You get Xavier Legette, whether that's who you wanted or not. The Panthers targeted him as their top guy at wide receiver who would be available at 33. Of course, they traded 32 to get him, and they got him to come in and likely start right away. They traded up for Jonathan Brooks. Don't necessarily love getting a running back in that spot, but I do like the player. He is coming off an ACL, but still, they felt like he fits what they want to do running back-wise as a versatile player in the backfield. And then finally, they decided it's time to get a tight end. They get Jatavion Sanders, who, had he come back to college and got drafted next year, he would have likely been the top tight end in the draft. So Jatavion Sanders, Jonathan Brooks, Xavier Legette, Deontay Johnson, Damian Lewis, Robert Hunt, Yosh Nijman, all of those players are coming in and making this Panthers offense better. Defensively, probably a different story, and we'll talk about that later on. But if your main thought about this offseason was to give Bryce Young a chance, make the Panthers offense better, that in itself has been a success based off of all the players that they've acquired, either via free agency or the draft. If you're looking at the team as a whole, has the team gotten better? I think the team has gotten better, certainly offensively. Defensively, I'm not so sure how much better the team has gotten. I think they've probably gotten worse. You don't take Frankie Louvu off the roster and Brian Burns off the roster and get better, in my opinion, even with the additions that they have made. And there's a question about that later on. I want to talk about that probably more in length on a show later, at a later date. But as far as, can I consider this offseason a success? Yeah. Bryce Young's been the main thought for me, getting things right for him. And the Panthers have gone out of their way and beyond to make that the case. So I'm going to call this offseason up to this point a success for the Carolina Panthers. Rob now asked me a question. With the moves we've made thus far this offseason, what's your bottom line record for us this season and why? Like last year, this year, and probably even next year is about Bryce Young. The Panthers got him offensive lineman. They got him weapons. He now has a chance to show us what he's about, to hopefully show us on a weekly basis what we saw in that Packers game, what we saw at the end of that Texans game against the Falcons, as well in the final minutes of that rainstorm that we saw here in Charlotte back last fall. That's what this season really is about to me. Win and loss record, obviously, that's important. I don't really have a number for you right now. It's May 3rd. Not totally concerned about what the record's going to be. A couple of things that we got to get through before really knowing what this roster is completely going to look like once we get to the September. But Bryce Young, how he's able to perform, him developing, showing that he was worth, the Carolina Panthers, maybe with the number one to get him in the draft. That is really what I'm focused on yet again. When you give up that much for a quarterback, yeah, that's going to be the primary focus, what that quarterback looks like. And if you made the right decision, yes, wins, losses, that is why we play the game. And that is going to be your main focus as well. I'm just looking at this as still a rebuild. I don't expect this team to be a playoff team. Winning more than 2 games, obviously, it would be nice. Getting up to, I'm not going to really give you the number, but we'll see. I'll get to that in August. Right now, not necessarily thinking too much about all of that. We'll take a quick pause, and I'll come back and I'll answer more of your weekly Friday mailbag questions right here on Locked On Panthers. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So if you're a Knicks fan and the Knicks have moved on to the Eastern Conference semifinals and they win their game, awesome, $150. If they lose, awesome, $150. Same goes for if you're a fan of an NHL team. Whoever's still in the playoffs, I'm not watching, but still, you bet on your team. They win, they lose. No matter what, $150 in your pocket. Bet on everything from slap shots, home runs, slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Seriously, what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Let's get back into it. The weekly Friday mailbag here on Locked on Panthers. Panthers are post-draft now as we wait a couple of weeks before the beginning of OTA is going to have a rookie minicamp next weekend. And I love the excitement around something like rookie minicamp where you're going to get to see Xavier Legette. You're going to get to see Jonathan. Well, I guess Jonathan Brooks probably won't be out. He may be out there just to be in town, but I don't know how much of you're going to see. There was a video like last year, best of rookie mini camps. Really? The best of rookie mini camp. That just shows you just how big the NFL is, that fans are just drooling, foaming at the mouth to get any sort of rookie mini camp content. So I'll try to provide it to you. Don't know what all there is to say about it, but we'll get into it next week, I'm sure. Over to Rod now, who has a question about what the Panthers' NFC South opponents did in the draft this past year. Of the players selected by our NFC South opponents, which player do you see giving Panther fans hell for the foreseeable future? I looked across all those rosters, the Saints, the Bucks, and the Falcons, and I didn't really find a player that really concerned me that much about what they potentially could do. I think back to when Kyle Pitts was taken by the Falcons, like that's going to be a problem. And he hasn't really been that much of a problem up until this point, especially when the Panthers have played against them. And Arthur Smith had a lot to do with that, of course. The one player that I'm looking at where I feel like we've been here before is Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's down there in New Orleans with the Saints. It's mainly because the Panthers didn't take him. And it feels similar to the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson situation a couple of years ago, where the Panthers certainly needed a safety, could have taken him, would have made a lot of sense. And instead, the Saints got him, and he turned out to be a really good player in New Orleans. He's been to Philadelphia since then, been in Detroit. I don't know where he's at right now, but that's the guy the Panthers really could have used. And instead, they end up like a guy with Rashawn Golden, who was best known for the double middle birds when he played at Tennessee, then just made a boneheaded move in a game against New Orleans, coincidentally, and then was cut thereafter after that loss where I believe it was Joey Slye just choked the game away in New Orleans that afternoon back when Ron Rivera was still here. But, yeah, Kool-Aid McKinstry, I think he's going to be a good player. And the Panthers certainly could have used a corner if they get Stephon Gilmore. That's great for this season. Don't see how that's going to help them in 2027. But, of course, our focus mainly is going to be right now. The team's focus they showed in the draft last week was on more than just 2024. They were focused on 25 and 26 and 27. And Kool-Aid McKinstry is a guy that could help you in 27, not necessarily a guy who he could help you in 24. But Stephon Gilmore, maybe he could do more for you this fall if he indeed comes to Carolina. So that's a player I look at just mainly because the Panthers were on the board at 39. He was sitting there when they got back up at 46. He was already gone. It wasn't a position they were targeting, it seemed like, in the draft anyway. So at least getting an outside corner who could start for them right away opposite of JC and compete with Dane Jackson. So he's someone I'm looking at as who's going to provide Panther fans hell more so than the team hell, just based off of could have had Kool-Aid, think he can be a good player. And if he does turn out to be a good player and the Panthers struggle to find someone to fill that outside corner slot opposite of JC, that will be a point that's brought up time and time again by all fans here in Panther Nation. Question here from Kyle asking about draft grades. Kyle asking, why do you think so many media members are grading our draft as the worst out of all? Saying this line, traded up for a receiver who did nothing until last season, running back in the second with a torn ACL, project linebacker, rough film, and tight end who can't block. I believe our draft wasn't bad at all. I have a lot of pieces to build with, even if Bryce isn't the answer quarterback, but I believe that he is. Well, Kyle, you are a Panther fan. Therefore, you are going to be filled with hope based off of the draft. Every single year, people love their team's draft class. I did see people when I did the live shows last week in the chat who said that they didn't like the draft. They're going to be in the minority, and they're also going to be chastised by Panther fans filled with hope coming off the 2-15 season, hoping that who the Panthers brought in last week will be the guys who can turn things around. That may be the case. That may not be the case. We're not going to find out for a couple of seasons. As I told y'all earlier this week, I think draft grades are stupid. They're a useless exercise. But here's the thing. I had to do draft grades last Sunday. Bleacher Report asked me to do it. They paid me to do it. Was it something that I wanted to do? No. Because have I done draft grades on this podcast where I get to choose what I talk about? No. But there's places like ESPN, like Bleacher Report, like The Athletic, and all over where they have higher ups who tell the writers, the creators, this is what you need to talk about. This is what you need to write. This is what you need to discuss. Not everyone wants to do it, but it's also a way in this time where there's not a lot going on. The schedule should be released here shortly. OTAs were still not really anything going on. That's all that consequential. They're not even, they might do a little bit of installs, but they're not deciding who's going to make the team based off of what's happening in OTAs. So we're sitting at a point in time where not a lot of real news in the NFL, and you're trying to put stuff out there, and that's what happens with draft grades. But there are some decent points that are being made. I didn't read a single one of the draft grades, to be honest with you, Kyle, because again, I don't care about the draft grades. We'll find out in 3 years' time when the Panthers have to make a decision on Xavier Legette's fifth-year option, whether they made the right decision by bringing in Legette. We'll find out in a couple of years' time, as well as all these players enter into the final year of the rookie deal, what they've been able to do, and if they are starters and key pieces of what we would hope by that point in time would be a playoff contending Carolina Panthers team. Well, we're not going to know that after 1 week, which is where we're not even at this point in time. A week ago, we knew Xavier Legette was a Panther. We did not know at this point in time who else was going to be drafted in the final 6 rounds of that draft. But looking at it, Legette didn't do anything until this past season. We went over this earlier this week of Andrew Lyon of Locked On Gamecocks about why that may have been the case. Losing his parents could have factored in. Injuries could have factored in. The change of offensive coordinator and coaching staff and multiple quarterbacks could have factored in as well. All we know is Legette did not produce until this past season, and the hope is he'll come in and do that now in Carolina more consistently. Jonathan Brooks did not play for his first 2 years, got an opportunity last year at Texas, was really good, then tore his ACL. That is a concern that someone's coming off of a significant knee injury. Now it's a clean ACL tear for what it's worth, and he should be cleared by July 1st, should be cleared by July 1st. And then once he is, what's he going to look like? Is he going to be the same guy? We will see. As far as linebacker goes, Trevin Wallace, it's not like he's expected to play that much this season anyways. He could be out there if something were to happen to Shaq or Josie Jewell. So that is important that he's ready to go. We'll see. And then as far as Jatavion Sanders, the knock on him and probably why he didn't go into the 4th round is that not the best blocking tight end. Carolina's not super concerned about his blocking, I think, right now. What they're concerned about is finding another offensive weapon in the pass game, and that's what Sanders can do. They don't believe that Tommy Trimble and Ian Thomas are those guys, Stephon Sullivan as well, but they look at Jatavion Sanders as being someone who they can build with as a passing threat in the tight end position, and then Pat McPherson, the Panthers tight end coach, can coach him up and get him to the point where he is not a liability when it comes to blocking at that spot. I wouldn't get too caught up in the draft grades from folks out there. Yes, it's important to read the analysis from those who cover the draft closely and maybe have spent more time looking at these players. You just got to wait and see how things play. Nothing that they say about whether the Panthers got an A, a B, a C, D, or an F matters. It doesn't. Now, the analysis, sure, it's worth listening to, but the grade itself does not matter. What matters is what do these guys do once they get on the field? If they perform, then none of the draft grades mattered. If they don't perform, then still none of the draft grades mattered. So I wouldn't get too caught up in it if I were you, but that's me and that's you. So I think there's some reason. I think it's pretty easy to you kind of laid out why they are critical, because those are certainly questions that are reasonable to ask about the Panthers draft class and pertaining to each one of those players who they brought in there in the first 4 rounds. Take that quick pause and we'll come back and I'll answer the rest of your weekly Friday mailbag questions right here on Locked On Panthers. We've all been there either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. And that's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks of a wrecking ball, charge other players rent for their iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Back to your questions. We've talked a lot about the offense this offseason. What about the defense? Alex has a question about where the defense is at here in Carolina as we head into the next phase of the offseason. Alex asking, are the Panthers setting up Ejiro Evero to fail? It feels like he's been put in a situation where he's being asked to do more with less talent. Let's look at the defense now compared to what it was last season. We have seen Brian Burns depart via the trade, Dante Jackson depart as well via trade, Jeremy Chin, he's walked in free agency. Frankie Louvu took a lesser offer to leave Carolina for Washington. Von Bell was released. Those are 4.5 starters because we didn't see Jeremy Chin play the kind of role we expected. Those are 4.5 starters that are no longer here in Carolina, along with Deshaun Williams, who was not very good for the Panthers last season. And you saw Camus Grugier-Hill and Deion Jones, 2 players. Deion Jones recently, I think, with the Buffalo, where Camus is still available. But those are 2 guys that played a lot of snaps at linebacker, with Shaq Thompson being injured last season. So a decent amount of guys who play a lot of snaps at Carolina no longer here this upcoming season. Derek Brown's back. With the defensive line, there's a lot of questions about how good it actually will be this year. DB, no questions about him. Everyone else, certainly questions. Deshaun Williams, as I mentioned, was not good, especially against the run. Ashawn Robinson, who comes over, has familiarity in the scheme, having been in L.A., where Ejiro Evero previously coached, and a lot of people on his coaching staff were in the past. That helps. He's a better run stopper than Deshaun Williams is, and he also is younger. So there's a benefit there. He's also a journeyman, and he's not been someone that teams have wanted to invest in long term. He's just a rotational type of defensive lineman who's going to likely start the season. Shai Tuttle wasn't good for the Panthers last year, and if the contract structure was different, I don't think he's still in Carolina. We'll see what Nick Thurman, who showed some signs last year, and LeBron Ray and Jaden Crumedy, who they just brought in via the draft, Mississippi State, and Raekwon Williams are able to do. But that defensive line unit was bad last year, and looking at what they brought in, it's hard for me to believe that it's going to go from bad to like good because they have not added that much. So I don't know what he's going to be able to do with that defensive line outside of Derek Brown. And God forbid anything happens to Derek Brown, knock on wood, that is going to be a brutally bad defensive line unit this upcoming season. So I have a lot of concerns there on the line of scrimmage outside of Derek Brown on the defensive line. Linebacker, Shaq's coming back off an injury. We'll see what he looks like as he's now over 30, and that's a tough injury to come back from. You add in Josie Jewell, and if you just look at it's Shaq back for a full season, and then Josie Jewell over Frankie Louvu, hard to say that the linebacker core necessarily got better. Now, you have 2 veterans, and last year you did have veterans, and paired with Frankie, who's just a banshee. I don't know. Josie Jewell's obviously not a better player than Frankie Louvu, and we all would have rather had Frankie Louvu here in Carolina, and I'm sure the Panthers would have rather had Frankie Louvu in Carolina. Corner, still major question marks there. J.C. Horn, can't depend on him to stay healthy, unfortunately. That's just been the case. The hope is this will be the year, but right now, until he does it, it's hard to rely on him to be healthy. And if he goes down, who's going to start? Is it going to be Deshaun Jameson again? They're going to do DiCaprio Boodle. And to those guys' credits, they stepped up last season and they played well when called upon. And that's really what the defense did. They were able to step up and play well. I just think that they've lost a decent amount of talent. And when you lose your top 2 defenders and you're replacing them with Josie Jewell and Jadeveon Clowney, who, yes, Clowney had a great year last year, and we've discussed this. That's awesome for him. And the hope is that he can stay healthy, which he says if he's healthy, he's a Pro Bowler. Well, he was healthy last year, was not a Pro Bowler, correct? So we'll see. It's wait and see mode on that one as well, because we have seen him have great seasons like last year. We've also seen him have 2 sack seasons and 0 sack seasons, and we're not too far removed from those. I just don't think that this defense, talent-wise, is better than it was last year. I think the talent has diminished, and yes, injuries were a big problem last year. Guys got experience. I'm not going to say he's being set up to fail. I think this is certainly a less talented defense, and a lot of numbers last year said that this was not that great of a defense, even if just a normal, just total defense, so they were top 5. A lot of areas they certainly were not top 5 in, if you really dig deep into the stats. And I think the offense has gotten better, but I think the defense has certainly gotten worse, and we'll see what kind of impact it has in Carolina. Jaro's a good defensive coordinator. He may do what he had last year, and this was a unit that was basically the only reason a lot of times in the second half of the season they even had a chance to win a game, like really at least be in the game, not necessarily win, but be in the game. and it'll be interesting to see how that works out this fall. But I want to spend more time on an episode looking at the total defensive rebuild that they've undergone this offseason. Jordan now asking, I don't know how confident you truly feel about the receiving core right now, but do you think that it would be a good idea to just bring Zay Jones in for a meeting, maybe just to put him as a number 4 receiver on the depth chart to take some pressure off of Adam Thielen? I think they're probably set at receiver. Maybe, let's see. Deontay Johnson's going to be on the roster. Adam Thielen's going to be on the roster. Jonathan Mingo's going to be on the roster, you would think. Then Xavier Legette's going to be on the roster. Amir Smith-Marsette's probably going to be on the roster. And then Terrace, TBD there. David Moore, TBD. I don't know if they need to add Zay Jones. Like, as far as like how confident I feel about the wide receiver core, I feel confident in Deontay Johnson, and I feel confident in Adam Thielen. Everyone else, though, is a question mark. And you can feel confident in Xavier Legette if you want. He's never played in the NFL. And again, he's coming off of just one season of production. So there is still going to be some skepticism from your boy when it comes to that. And yes, we got into the context of it all, but I need to see it again, because we've only seen him do it once. And now he's going to have to do it again in the NFL. And that's a lot to ask. I'm not going to ask that guy to go out there and have 1,000 yards in a rookie season. I'm not expecting that. I don't know what I'm expecting. Hopefully for more than what they got out of Mingo last year. And I would expect more than what they got out of Mingo last season, but he's an unproven commodity at this level. And Jonathan Mingo, to this point, is an unproven commodity at this level. Terrace Marshall, unproven at this level. There are plenty of questions, and it would be reasonable, as you say, to bring in a guy like Zay Jones. But I don't think that's what they want to do. I look at what they've done so far. They looked at adding another veteran. They haven't. Maybe they'll still do it. I feel like Michael Gallup's still available, but that never went anywhere. Maybe they do. I think right now, though, they have the young guys that they want to work with, and they have their veterans, and they're going to roll with this crew, and maybe they add somebody later on. But I don't know if that person's going to be somebody who's going to really elevate the wide receiver core that much. Final question comes from Sean, who said, I watched all the War Room coverage posted by the Panthers social media accounts last week. Is it just me, or did you also pick up on the limited commentary from David Tepper, especially when Dan Morgan was making the calls to players we drafted? It appeared that David Tepper tried to let the GM and coach do the talking. Well, I know that Dan handed the phone. The one video I saw, I really didn't go and watch this stuff. The one video I saw, well, Dan Morgan was handing the phone over to David Tepper. Like, Dave's going to be in there. That's not a surprise. And he's going to talk to the guys that they draft. It is his team that he owns. I totally understand that. It's within his right. I just think you would be naive to believe that a lot's changed as far as things go. And that's kind of illustrated in what happened last week of Dilworth Neighborhood Grill. And I saw the video. Yes, far more seems to be buddy, but like, why even go in there? You're not the benevolent billionaire that you want people to believe you were, at least when you came to Charlotte originally. The team stinks. And I love the article that was out there of the guy who owns Dilworth Neighborhood Grill talking about when the Panthers lose, he's not impacted financially, he being David Tepper, but the owner actually is, because if the Panthers stink, people are not going to go to the bar as much. Now, fortunately for Dilworth Neighborhood Grill, it's a Jets bar, and I also believe it's a Steelers bar. So they seem to actually have people in there, whether the Panthers win or lose or not. But I totally understand the point that it's big enough where there's areas where the Jets fans can be, Steelers fans can be, and Panther fans can be, and they're probably getting less Panther fans when the team's no good, and the people want to spend their Sundays being miserable and watching this football team play. So, yeah, I'm not fooled by David Tepper. All right, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter, at Julian Council. We're again on Friday next week. I'll be right here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me to get those questions into me by next Thursday to be a part of the show. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always and forever. Keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all on Monday.